Hi, everyone, and welcome to another Home Tech podcast. I'm Seth Johnson, and this week, not joined by Jason Griffin. Jason's out traveling, but to fill his shoes, a very good friend of the show, Richard Gunther of the Home On podcast, has agreed to come on and really help out this week and help us through the show. So, Richard, how are you doing, man? It sounds like you got a cough there.
I have that post-CES sick that everybody gets. I thought I was going to get through this year without actually coming home with something. I was doing so well. I sit down on the plane. The guy on the plane next to me is like sick as a dog. And we're like there for 3.5 hours together. So I blame him.
It's nothing like a captive audience to help spread the flu or crud around.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So so you were at CES this year. You were in the mix of it. In the blackout, as it's been called this year.
I was indeed.
Let's talk about that a little bit later. But overall, you had a good show?
Yeah, I think it was a good show. I don't think there was anything revolutionary there this year. I think we knew what to expect for the most part. A couple little surprises, but for the most part, it was a good show. It gets bigger every year. A lot of folks talk about how, is this still relevant? Do we still need to be doing this? Well, a lot of people apparently think so.
Yeah, I saw a number of those stories. There's one over on CE Pro right now that we'll put in the show notes at HomeTech.fm/185. 185, is that right? It's got to be up there. 195. The CE Pro is saying that this is the high-end audio attendee, like the location. There was barely anybody walking through that area, which it's kind of disappointing, I guess, or sounds disappointing on face value, but there are a lot of other shows that kind of cater to those markets a little bit better these days. And the story points that out, that ISE is right around the corner for all the high-end audio European, manufacturers. They'll go to ISE. And I think there was just another one recently in Berlin that's dedicated towards high-end audio. So those manufacturers are going there, and they're saying they may stop attending CES, which may or may not be a bad thing. I'm not sure.
Yeah. It's funny. Those areas have always been there, and I think they become less and less relevant to the general consumer crowd. And, you might attribute that to, all right, people have become used to crappy audio and they just don't care anymore. Or you might also attribute it to the fact that you can get really good audio for much less expensive around your home in ways like you never could before. So is the need for that high-end audio as relevant for general consumers, or is it more specialized to like the CEDIA crowd or, folks who build music rooms in their homes and stuff like that?
Right. It's a consumer electronics show. And I imagine, back in the 70s and 80s when hi-fi audio and stereo audio was really, I don't know if it was at its peak or maybe it was. That was the consumer electronics to be showing off, and of course,
right.
Of course, it was had prime location there at the show. But like you said, today you can get a really decent music streaming. I mean, really decent quality movie. What's the French company? Is it Deezer or Tidal? Tidal, I think. Where you can get
Tidal.
Yeah, you get the new high def format, and I mean it's supposed to sound great. I mean, so I know that this year there's another one. I heard about it over on the CEDIA Technology podcast that they do. There's another format that manufacturers are just building into devices now, and if you have this service, it kind of pops up as an endpoint. So if your player supports this particular service, it'll pop up as an endpoint. You can just stream that audio straight to an amplifier that may be hooked up to some really nice amplifier, a nice amplifier that may be streaming enabled and hooked up to a nice pair of speakers. So, I mean, I think the stuff is out there still. I think it's just evolved, and maybe good music is not like out of the reach. It's not like where we think of being in those giant $10,000 speakers and $20,000 worth of amplifiers. And don't get me started on the snake oil wires that have to connect them.
Oh yeah. Yeah. With solid gold tips and everything, because that's a great conductor. That's the best. Oh wait, no,
coat hangers work better, I think. Yeah, that's the unfortunate part is people get sucked into that, and a lot of money is wasted on high-end audio cables. So
monster.
And speaking of companies that aren't around anymore, I mean, I haven't heard of them in a long time. I used to sell a lot of monster cable, and man, good margins, but I don't know. I mean, they were pretty much. It became pretty apparent that they were a marketing company in name, and I'm not sure what the products were. They did have some decent products, but I can't say that for the whole line. There was some stuff there that was just a little bit too high priced. So, all right, well, Richard, there's a couple of news stories that popped up this week that I think we should talk about. First up, Google Home was one of the big winners, I guess, over at CES. From what everybody was saying, and you were there on site. Google had pulled out like an all-stop marketing campaign to be everywhere in everybody's face to the point where the Amazon Echo wasn't being shown in most booths, or if it was just kind of like, oh yeah, we do that, but hey, look at our Google Home integrations. But Google Home this week has had some interesting stories pop up. Some of them good, but this one's bad. Reportedly, Google Home devices and Chromecast devices are doing some kind of weird broadcast storm, where when the device wakes up, it's where it should send out one packet and said, "Hey, I'm awake." It sends out 100,000 packets, and the longer your device is sleeping, the larger this packet burst may be. So this kind of wreaks all sorts of havoc on network devices. And considering these are all wireless devices, they don't have any Ethernet plugged into them. You could have a real big problem with your Wi-Fi if one device just decides to go on a tangent.
Yeah, this is kind of crazy. Now, what is unclear to me is if this is affecting all Google Home devices, or if this is limited to specific situations, like maybe different specific types of network configurations or different models of the Google Home. I couldn't quite glean from this post who actually was affected by this.
I've got a Google Home in front of me, and I haven't had any problems. And I'm on a Ubiquiti Amplify with the Amplify HD with the 3 mesh points. I don't have any problems, but somebody in our hub channel was talking about this earlier today, and made mention that he's kind of on the same network setup that I have. And he was having problems, didn't know what it was, thought it was maybe the Amplify stuff, switched over to Eero, and the problems went away. So I don't know. I haven't noticed any issues at all with my Wi-Fi. The speeds have been actually great, if not better than I'm supposed to be getting off of Comcast here. The Amplify system's keeping up with what my ISP is serving for sure.
Yeah, very strange. Has there been any news from Google, like any word from them saying something?
Yes, Google spokesperson told Engadget, "We are aware of a small number of users are having issues, and our team is working quickly to share a solution." So they'll hopefully be getting on this. I think this is probably one of those things that's rare. Like, it's got to be a hardware combination of things, or maybe even a hardware and settings combination of things, where you have this special situation where the device gets hung up and decides to send out all these packets and saying that it's awake. It's an unfortunate situation for some people that have this, but I guess the reason we bring it up in this show is for the listeners to be aware that something like this may be happening on your network and taking down your Wi-Fi at some point in time. And maybe we have a lot of dealers in our audience. Maybe they are getting some complaints from homeowners who may have installed a Google Home in their home over the holiday season, and are calling and saying the Wi-Fi is not working, when in actuality it may be something, maybe a little bug with the Google Home. So hopefully we'll have some resolution on this later on.
You know, it's funny. I had a similar problem with a Sonos speaker about 2 years ago, where my Play 1 just went bad and was bombarding the network. And I couldn't understand why my network was just coming to a crawl, and my router just seemed to be slammed. And it ultimately ended up coming down to a Sonos speaker that they ended up replacing for me.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've seen networks with Sonos go bad before. Generally, it has to do with the way they do like the wireless Sonos network piggybacking on top of whatever network you have in the house, and the configuration of that and Ethernet cables. It just can kind of get kind of wonky. But I've never heard of one going bad like that. That's wild. So glad Sonos stepped up and replaced it, because that would not have been a fun conversation. That's a very expensive speaker.
Yeah. Yeah.
The next story I want to bring up, it kind of pops up around Google again. Google Home. I was setting mine up the other day, and I noticed that it had this skill. I didn't know that it was new, but it looks like Yonomi is now integrated with Google Home. I know, Richard, you have probably a lot more experience with Yonomi than I do. From my initial interpretation of it and kind of minor use of it is that if you had some of these Internet of Things connected devices and you wanted to do a little bit more fancy automation within an app, you could do that just by downloading an app. You didn't need a hub. You didn't need anything like that. The app became the hub, and you could just go to town.
Yeah, exactly. They were one of the early players in this software-only hub solution where really it's just an app on your phone, and you can run it on a phone or you can run it on a tablet. You can define pretty complex routines with conditions, and they even assist you with things that might make sense to connect together based on what you've included in the app. It goes through and auto discovers all the stuff in your house. I mean, it's just a really well-designed software-only solution to try and tie stuff together. And they've had a skill on Amazon's platform for a while now. So it's really nice to see that they have this coming out on the Google platform too. I was talking with one of their founders actually just last week. They're really excited about this. They're looking forward to doing some great new things this year. And I think that's going to happen. They just got a big, huge round A of venture funding too. So hopefully we'll see some cool new things coming from them in addition to this.
Yeah, this is pretty cool. They have some really good examples in the press release that they have, where you're just saying, yo, Google, or whatever the activation word is. I can't really say it because it's right in front of me. Activate fall asleep. And I guess there's a routine on Yonomi called fall asleep, and it will shut off the TV through the Harmony Hub. It will turn off all your Sonos speakers, turn off the LIFX bulbs, and turn off these Philips Hue smart or light strip, and lock your doors. So that's not a bad, all software. You don't have to have any hardware other than the Internet of Things devices. I think that's great.
It is great. And as I understand, I think they do have some sort of back end that's making all of this work. So what I'm not clear on, and I've never, I probably knew this at one time, but I don't remember now, whether the person who owns the phone needs to be home for this to work. I don't think it does. I think you just set it up on the phone, it runs on the service, and then you connect the skill to your device, and then the skill's connecting directly to the service and making all this stuff happen through the cloud. It's kind of like magic.
Yeah. That's one way of saying it. The magic of the cloud. We're here. This is the dream that we've had for years when we've been talking about the cloud.
Until the lights go off.
Yeah, until the lights go off and you can't turn them back on. But at least by yelling at Google, you can't turn it back on. There's always the option of physically turning a switch like an animal. I guess I should have done a better job picking out stories this week, but they all seem to be revolving around Google in some way. And I can assure you that I'm not that excited about having the Google Home sitting in front of me.
No, I sense a clear bias, Seth.
I mean, it's a good device. It's better than the Echo that I have in the kitchen. But there's a lot of stories that have happened around the Google Home this week, and I think this is an interesting one. I didn't catch this. One of our patrons of the show, Jonathan Horvath, sent this to me and said, "Hey, did you catch that Google was showing off Z-Way support for the for the Google Assistant, and I didn't. So I ran into this story over here on installation-international.com, and they say that Google. This is a story kind of mostly centered around the conversation about Google and Amazon kind of going head to head this year. But a couple of things that popped up that I thought were curious were that Google was actually showing support in the Z-Wave booth rather than kind of leaning on Google's own Thread protocol, which is kind of where I would have expected Google Home to be supporting.
Yeah, now there are a couple things about this that make this really interesting. The first thing is that their primary presence in the Z-Wave booth was to support Hogar Controls. And Hogar Controls is a startup that's coming out with this product called the Milo, which is a Google speaker that is also going to be a Z-Wave and I think Zigbee hub.
Oh.
So basically, your Google speaker will be your hub, kind of like a Google or kind of like an Echo Plus is, but with more support than just Zigbee. So it's a pretty clever device. I actually talked with their CEO at one of the events that occurred last week, and they're going to be coming out with this, I believe, in the first half of this year. It's a nice looking device. It seems like it's everything that someone who wants to get into smart home without having to buy, a different hub, but still, wants the ability to open up to all the different devices that are available through Z-Wave or Zigbee could really benefit from. So I think this has some potential.
Yeah, and I just went to their website right now. It does look really good. Did you get to see it in person?
So, I did. It's a beautiful device. Really nice industrial design.
Yeah.
I did not get to hear it.
It looks similar to, I guess, a HomePod. Like maybe it's the same size, but it looks like.
Oh, it's small.
Is it small?
No. It's more like the size of the new Echo.
Interesting.
So it's not a large device at all.
And they also are showing a device called the Pebble, which is a wireless 3D touch button. Too bad Jason isn't on the show tonight. He would be talking about that one quite a bit.
He would, although I will tell you that's kind of one of the things that I think is nice that they have, but I think it's going to be a little bit confusing for people, and I'm curious how well it'll do. This product's actually already available as a scene controller, I believe, and it runs on gesture. So, you can tap it, but then there's a total of 10 different gestures you can use on this otherwise nondescript button to control things. Tell me that's going to work in your household.
I can barely remember, and I've had iPhone for, I can't tell you how long. Like the first iPhone I had was the 4. There are swipe gestures on the iPhone and the iPad now that I can't remember even exist. So I can't imagine having a 3D space where I'm supposed to do gestures inside that 3D space and try and remember how to do them. I used to be a music major, so maybe it's like conducting. Like maybe I could remember it that way, but I don't know. That may be a little bit too much for some people. I think the hand-eye coordination to make the smart home go.
Yep. The other thing that I wanted to mention, and you may have brought this up on your last episode, Google was there in the Z-Wave booth because they were in pretty much every booth. I don't think there was there probably was, but based on how many Google people were there in uniform, and their uniforms were awesome, I don't think there was a product that was integrating Google Home support that didn't have a Google person in the booth. It was crazy how many people they had on the floor.
That's what I was hearing. And their uniform this year, what was it? The little white.
Yeah, they were basically wearing all white. And so it was either like a white jumpsuit or white slacks and a button-down shirt, and almost all of them had some sort of Google colored winter cap on as well. And they had in big letters across the back, Google Assistant. It was just so clever.
That's very clever. That is very clever. Well, and so that kind of brings us back into the CES conversation. You and I were talking a little bit about this before the show. Since you were there in the blackout, I was not in the blackout. What did we see and hear differently? And man, I can guarantee you that we heard a lot about Google this week. They certainly held outside the LG TV. I think they held the most news stories that I ran across. Everybody had seemed to have been talking about Google.
Yeah, they made a splash, and I think a lot of it had to do with the fact that they were everywhere. They were also a sponsor. They had the monorails wrapped in Google colors and the catchphrase to start your Google Assistant. They had a big house, if you will, out in the lot that you could go in and see demonstrations and win Google Home devices and stuff like that. I mean, it was their presence was unavoidable. Unlike last year and the year before, where the big story was that Amazon was everywhere, even though they weren't actually there. It was kind of the opposite of that. And, you know, when listening to you talk about this and seeing some of your posts about CES, it seems as though the impression is that Google was everywhere and Amazon was nowhere to be found. I don't really think that's the case. I don't think there's any device out there that's saying, oh, we're going to support the Amazon ecosystem and have a skill for that, but we're going to support the Google ecosystem and have a skill for that, but not an Amazon skill. That's not happening. But I think this was the catch-up year. This was the year that all of the people that were running to Amazon to build skills are now supporting Google Home. And that's a good thing. That's only good for consumers.
Right. You'll have the choice not only in the products that you go out and buy and what those products, maybe the features, maybe the price points, but you'll have the choice on what voice assistant you want to control them with, or ecosystem that you want to control them with. So that's great. I remember distinctly talking about in years past how much was around Amazon and voice control, and it seems like they have. Well, they were the first. They're the first into the market that really made a big splash in the market and said, here's a very niche thing that you can do. As long as you do this correctly, it'll work. And we'll put some little jokes in there to make it funny. And they did a good job at that. I mean, and it's kind of been that way for a number of years now. And like you said, everybody else is catching up. Apple hasn't really even started catching up. It's kind of funny. Like they had Siri first before any of this, if I remember correctly. They were,
yep.
Yeah, Siri was like before everybody, but they marketed that particular technology differently than Amazon did. Now they are trying to wedge Siri into a can, as coined on one of our past episodes together. So they're trying to wedge that into a small device like the Echo, and we're not even sure what they're going to do with that. I don't know. Do you want to talk a little bit about Apple? I could talk about them a little bit.
Yeah, I think they were overshadowed. It wasn't as if there were no vendors talking about HomeKit support. There were vendors talking about HomeKit support, but that's not exciting and new. So there weren't a whole lot of reporters talking about HomeKit support.
Right.
I don't think it is as prevalent as support for the Amazon and Google ecosystems. And that's not surprising because I think everybody wants to see, okay, well, how is this HomePod thing going to do? Is this going to solve the problem for people who don't wear an Apple Watch or don't have an Apple device in their pocket to be able to control their home or do other stuff around the home? And don't forget that Apple doesn't license Siri to work in other devices. So you're not going to see all of the kind of integration that was really big this year with everyone saying, oh yeah, and by the way, she's baked in.
Right.
It's right in the product. You know, this sound bar, yeah, she's on board. Oh, and by the way, this smoke detector / speaker. Oh, I could go off on that for a while. She's baked in. I mean, so we're seeing all these devices that have Google Assistant and Amazon's Assistant right on board. Siri's not doing that. And I don't expect that we're going to see Siri in any devices like that. That's not how Apple works.
Yeah. And I don't think I don't think they would. It, like you said, it's not how they work, but it doesn't seem like that would be on brand for Apple to do it all. They may say, well, we don't really need to be in these devices because we're in the watch, we're in the phone, and we're in these long range microphones. And they have a good point there. I mean, that's their ecosystem.
Yep. No, that's true. Now there are other players too, and they weren't really getting any mention. It's
Cortana,
Bixby. Well, and there's Cortana, right? So, I might argue that Bixby probably had more play than Cortana did. And if you don't know what Bixby is, not surprising because it's only Samsung stuff, but Samsung's making a big play to push all of their IoT stuff onto one platform now, which was desperately necessary. And it's all going to come under a smart things umbrella. So all of the Samsung Smart Home, Samsung Connect, Arctic, Cloud, all of that stuff is going to be called smart things. And in theory, it's all going to be able to use Bixby. And Bixby is the assistant that they're working on to control your phone, control your TV, control your devices in your home. And they're doing the same thing that Apple's doing in that it's a walled garden. It's the stuff that they want to work with. So I don't know that I appreciate the audacity of that. I just don't think that it's going to work for them. And then you mentioned Cortana, and poor Cortana. I would say that my co-host Josh and I do this show Entertainment 2.0 where we still have a pretty heavy slant. Well, it's not a slant. The show is geared toward Windows entertainment tech. And we so desperately want Cortana to take off and for people to realize, oh, you know what? You actually have a voice assistant in your computer already.
Right.
But most people aren't aware of it, just like Media Center, and they're not really using it. And so Microsoft has not made a lot of headway with the public with Cortana, and apparently not with vendors either, because no vendor that we were there talking to was showing Cortana integration. None, not one. There was a vendor that had a Cortana logo on their wall somewhere, and that was it. They didn't have anything to show. So I don't know what's going on. They even put out a blog post about how excited they are with all of their upcoming vendor integrations this year during CES, I think probably to quell the concern that Cortana was nowhere to be found on the CES show floor.
That's interesting. That's interesting. I'm curious. Cortana is one of those that I think could do well if market conditions were different. If maybe Amazon didn't exist or something like that, and there was a strong competition for number 3 or 2,
right.
I think that it could do very well. But unfortunately, we've got the big 3. We've got Siri, I'm going to say her name, Alexa, and Google, all kind of being the big 3. And then, like you said, we've got these other ones. There's one more that I think you missed it here in our list. Comcast came out and announced that they would be offering free home automation capabilities to 15 million Xfinity customers. And they're using their own voice, whatever thing, platform for their little X1 remote.
I should back up for this.
Well, yeah, exactly. I'll put a little thing on that, but people really like having a voice remote. Oddly enough, I know many people who have switched from, and this is of course anecdotal, but having the ability to yell into the remote, search for this program, or tune in to CNN or whatever, and it just works. That's really a good use case for a voice service.
Sure.
And I think Comcast is kind of onto something, but doing their own thing and building it into their monthly bill. I'm sure it's free, but it's built in somewhere in there. That's going to be a rough thing. They're using the Stringify thing. Remember this? They acquired Stringify for a couple of months ago, maybe.
Yep.
So you can integrate August, Carrier, Ecobee, GE, Honeywell, Nest, Philips Hue, Skybell, Tile, and Yale, in all through Stringify. So that's pretty good. I mean, if you're just looking to basically turn on and off some lights or adjust your thermostat from your Comcast remote.
If you want to find your keys, all you have to do is find your remote first.
Right. And just yell at your remote, find my keys. And yeah, that's funny. It may be launched before we do this, but this is what I've been working on for like the past month or so, is a remote finder for the Control 4. It's a little app that you can load up on your touchscreens, iOS or Android device. And you can press a button and it'll page your remote through the Control 4 platform. So if you're a Control 4 customer and you're interested in that, I'll put a link to it in the show notes. Hopefully I'll have it launched by then. It's in beta right now, and we're wrapping up on marketing and stuff. So little preview for everybody who is listening to the show here on Friday. So throw that in there.
Wait. Are you saying that taping a big square tile to the back of the remote isn't a reasonable solution for most households, Seth?
No, I wouldn't say that. I mean, you could do that if you wanted, but at least if it's built into the remote.
That's what Tile shows on their site. So I just assume people do that.
Oh my gosh. Do they really? I'm going to have to put that into the show notes.
Isn't that terrible?
I have the Tile. So this year, we had this adorable, what we call tinsel pig, that we had in our Christmas decorations outside. And we went on vacation and I came back 2 days later and tinsel pig was gone. My daughter loved going up and kissing tinsel pig.
Who does that?
Yeah, some Grinch came by and stole tinsel pig. And so we had to get a replacement tinsel pig, which is not quite as cute as tinsel pig. But it's tinsel pig number 2. Now, this tinsel pig has a tile tracker hidden away.
Oh, that is awesome.
Yes, buried inside the tinsel where you can't actually see it if you were to just be a Grinch and steal somebody's Christmas decorations off the front lawn of their house. So I do like him for that.
That's cool. Now, the real question ends up being, if you end up having to follow tinsel pig somewhere, are you going to be smart enough to consider your environment before you go knocking on someone's door? I want my pig back.
No, I thought about how to do this. Hopefully they would be displaying it and I could just go up and take it. But I would also craft some sort of signage for their neighbors to know that someone who steals Christmas decoration lives here.
I like it.
That kind of thing. So yeah, there was thought put into that portion, the revenge side, that probably shouldn't have been, but yeah, the planning and everything to hide away a tile tracker inside of Christmas decorations. Oh man, it's unfortunate because the tile tracker is $35 and the Christmas decorations were about the same price. So I've got $65 worth of tinsel pig out there right now, or in December. So moving off voice control stuff and Google in general, because we don't want to talk about Google at all anymore for the rest of the show. What at CES really stood out to you this year?
Yeah, so a couple things I think just in terms of general themes that caught my attention. We all knew that VR and AR was going to be big there. Not necessarily a thing for smart home, but I think it is going to be a thing at some point in time once they really get this right. And getting this right, in my opinion, is going to have to look a whole lot more like a holodeck than the crazy equipment that you need to wear for this stuff now. But I do think that people are going to start considering how they arrange their family rooms and their media rooms to better accommodate stuff like this if they're going to be playing VR games or using AR in the home. And I think that's kind of interesting. I think that's how it potentially affects the home for consumers.
That's interesting, and that kind of ties into my industry as well. Like, where you put technology, but also, do I have enough room to have a game room in this particular space without having furniture in there?
Right.
That's an interesting thought. I think it's still got a ways to go before we see it dedicated family rooms or furniture moved out of family rooms before people start putting this in. It just seems like it's such a early time for this stuff right now.
Yep. No, I agree completely. But I do want the holodeck when it's available.
Yes.
That is going to be awesome.
Well, you did see the computer there, right? That runs the holodeck. I saw a picture on your Twitter feed. You saw the quantum computer that IBM is kind of selling right now.
It's unbelievable. Yeah, I will admit, I got a little bit verklempt looking at that thing, because it really felt like you were looking at history. IBM has been researching quantum technology for computers for literally decades. And I have a personal tie to this in that my uncle, who is now gone, used to work for IBM. His whole family was like an IBM family up in New York. And he told me like 20 some years ago about the cool stuff that they're doing with quantum and how they really believe that this is the future. And I just love that, there are companies like IBM who often get forgotten in this space, who are doing amazing research that does literally take decades.
Right. Yeah. And to have that, I mean, that looked amazing. I saw a picture of it elsewhere, but then I did see your post. Man, it is a beautiful machine. It kind of reminds me of looking at like the Cray supercomputer and just being in awe of like where you're standing, right? Like that I'll have to pilgrimage one day and see one of those at some point in time, because it looked really cool.
And it's a little bit steampunk.
Yeah. it absolutely is. Like tubes and things running all over for cooling. Yeah, absolutely.
Pretty cool.
They did a good job on the design of it, just to kind of, I mean, especially for this era, they did a good job for the design. So,
well, speaking of amazing things that computers can do, there was a whole lot of AI at CES this year. Of course, almost all of it was not AI.
I mean, we talked about this on our prediction show. This year, I have seen so many stories fly by that like, oh, we're going to use AI. What was the one I was listening to? I was listening to somebody talk about a television. I think it was...
it might have been... I know LG is saying that their wallpaper television will use AI in 2018. No, you know what? Filtering and displaying personalized results is not AI. That's an algorithm. Algorithms aren't AI.
Yeah. So any math problem that they're applying to something that they didn't have before, they're going to call AI this year. And especially if it learns somehow or improves its results better, somehow that becomes AI. The one I'm thinking of is a TV that will improve its picture quality based on, I think it's Sony actually is releasing their big TV, their 8K TV. And they were saying that they were going to basically build AI into it to kind of figure out how to make the picture better. And then in subsequent firmware releases, everybody will get that data compiled and sent back to their TVs. And I'm thinking, that's great and all, but my experience with TV manufacturers is once they ship you the TV that they shipped you in 2015, they don't care at all what you do with that TV. They just want you to buy the TV that is out in 2018. So I am very skeptical of any TV manufacturer putting any kind of technology in it. I know smart TVs were kind of big this year. Samsung was really hyping it up at theirs, LG as well. But I am still very skeptical in that, just because the commoditization of TVs has brought us to rock bottom prices on devices. On these devices, there's really no margin for them to make money on anymore, and they're putting all these fancy features in. But I have to question how long or how well those fancy features will work. And tagging on something as, unknown as AI. Like, what do you say? Like, yeah, we're going to use AI to improve your picture quality over the years that you have this TV. I mean, that they could just release firmware updates a couple times, and people would never even know that their picture quality looks great. They'd never even know, because they upgrade their sources each year, or the streaming gets better each year. No one would ever know. They could. So I'm just very, very skeptical. When anybody says AI this year, red flags everywhere.
Yeah. Yep. I agree. I tried not to be an AI troll when I was there, but there were just some cases where I had to ask, how is that AI? Nobody had good answers.
Right. No, they probably won't. I mean, yeah, it's good marketing this year, I think, just because it's gone a little bit crazy though. Is there anything else? Did you happen to see the I think the rollable LG display was the biggest story outside of the show. But from what I understand, they only had it in the booth and maybe one other place for a very short amount of time, and then they just got away. Did you get a chance to take a look at that?
I did not. And I caught the stories about it before the show because they announced it before the show started. It's a cool concept. I'm tired of seeing concepts, and I get that this could potentially change the situation for people who have furniture that conceals a television, or that maybe might only consider a projector because they can hide a screen or something like that. I think that's the use case that this at some point could address, but this just doesn't strike me as real yet. And I feel like we have a good way to go. I was more impressed by Samsung's Wall, which is essentially a modular LED technology that allows them to build a screen of any size or shape just by basically throwing the pixels together on a substrate. And they had some amazing demonstrations on their wall, and then they used a similar technology for their booth display, where the entire side of the booth, all these different shapes and outcroppings and everything, just looked like a big black surface with a bunch of corners and everything, but it was actually a bunch of big, huge screens, the full size of the side of the booth. And that was just phenomenal. That was a kind of commercial industrial version of the same sort of technology.
Yeah, the wall definitely got some press outside of the show, but I think that technology, I'm being overly dismissive of it. We've seen that technology in commercial, like what you're describing, in commercial at Infocom and those kind of shows for years now. I want to say 4 years ago, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, I went to Infocom. It was kind of the same way. Like, I was just kind of blown away as to what you could do with video. And now I think the wall, they were marketing that towards residential, from what I heard.
Yes.
So that's cool. That technology is kind of moving from commercial down into residential, and we'll have something to do with that later on. Are you going to get a wall, or are you going to roller TV?
Yeah. I'm happy with what I have right now. Honestly, I want to get to the point where we have the real wall, like we saw in the original Total Recall, where the whole wall is the screen. I think that would be friggin' cool.
It's it depends on the generation that I find of what movie technology you quote. So Total Recall is a pretty good one. The one in Back to the Future 2 comes up quite a bit, where he has the big, basically, wall that he can do picture in picture.
Oh yeah, and he puts all these different channels up at once.
Yep.
I remember that. Yep.
And of course, the more recent one is the Tom Cruise movie there with what is it?
Is it Minority Report?
Yes, Minority Report, where he kind of swipes around through the air and kind of see things in the air. That seems to have driven interface and what people want to do with gesture control more recently. But will be interesting to see where all this stuff ends up in the future. Over under on that LG roller shipping before the end of the year?
Oh, do I want to make another prediction added to my predictions that probably won't come true from the end of year episode? Let's see. I'm saying no.
Yeah, no. Okay. I was hearing that they were saying they were going to try and ship third quarter. So we'll see.
Okay. So first of all, CES timing rules, right? If something is shipping this month or next month, actually, if something is shipping this month, it means first quarter. If something is shipping next month, it means first half of the year. If something's shipping quarter two, it may come out this year. And if something is shipping any later than quarter two, we're not seeing it until next year, if at all. That's the math that I do to adjust any date that any vendor at CES tells me.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Well, Richard, I do want to thank you for jumping in here, kind of at a late hour too, to take over and help do the show here. If you want to listen to what you're doing and get in touch with you, where's the best place to do that?
Best place is over at the Digital Media Zone. I host 2 podcasts there. I spoke about one earlier. It's Entertainment 2.0. I host that with Josh Pollard, and we talk about entertainment in the Windows ecosystem. Believe it or not, that exists beyond just the Xbox. And then I also host Home On, and that's a show that focuses on DIY smart home products. So if you're not in the market to use an installer and you just kind of want to dig in yourself, but you don't want to be messing with Arduinos and all that stuff, what should you be looking at? And we pretty much cover the news. I try to do it every other week. I was so bad at that last year. I'm going to try and get back on schedule this year.
Well, both are great podcasts. So, Richard, thanks very much for coming on the show. I really do appreciate it.
All right. Thanks very much. It was fun.